Hi everyone, Richard here at Calvin Wazoo, bringing you another video about music, the music I listen to. And today we are going to have another episode of the genealogy of music. And the focal point of this episode is a man by the name of Steve Albini. Some of you probably know already quite a bit about Steve Albini. He was kind of a new thing for me. And the way I found out about him was initially through the documentary Breadcrumb Trail. This documentary was about the history of the band Slint and also the eventual production of their two albums, mostly focused on their final album that they released, because they only released two, and that one would be Spiderland. So through watching that, not only did I learn a lot about Slint, but that's when I was introduced to Steve Albini and many other people who were involved in the punk scene of the late 80s and into the early 90s. So kind of a post-punk period, really. And learning about Steve Albini and his role in being a producer. He was involved in production with many bands and also in sound engineering. Now, when it comes to production and sound engineering, there's really only two people that I know very much about, and that would be Frank Zappa and also Alan Parsons, because I know through my knowledge and collecting of Frank Zappa's material that he was not only very much deeply involved in production of his own music and also publishing, but he was also very much involved with other bands. Not necessarily with every album. For example, he worked on the recording and production for Captain Beefheart's Trout Mask Replica, Wildman Fisher, the GTOs. Alice Cooper's first album was a Frank Zappa production, and worked with others. Alan Parsons, very much a sound engineer. That's really kind of how he began, before even when he started the Alan Parsons Project. Probably most famous for the sound engineering he did on Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, the reason that album sounds so brilliant is because of Alan Parsons. He did such a great job that, Pink Floyd wanted him to do their next album, Wish You Were Here, but that's when he decided he wanted to start the Alan Parsons Project. I've talked about this before in another video. So, I know about them. Steve Albini, or anyone else for that matter, really didn't pay attention to these people who are the sound engineers and who was the producer, etc., with a lot of the music that I own and listen to. Not until that documentary, The Breadcrumb Trail, and then learning about Slint. So, in fact, Albini's got kind of a signature sound that it's very expansive, a lot of space. He tends to give space to many of the instruments and into the overall sound. He was very much an advocate for analog recording and analog masters. He found them superior to digital recording because with the digital there's so much compression going on, and he was about giving the music space, which is a nice thing to know, because with many of these bands, even though they were releasing material in the late 80s and into the 90s, when everybody was doing it on the digital format, and their vinyl pressings may not necessarily sound all that good because you're taking a digital master and then putting it into an analog format. Steve Albini, on the other hand, stuck with I believe, in its entirety with the analog format. And he saw that as being a superior way of recording and for mixing. He was also very much a critic of the record industry as a whole, that many record companies, he was very critical of them because of the way that they ripped off the artists and wrote contracts that benefited themselves rather than the artists. So he's been a very, very harsh critic with that. Part of that sound that he's noted for, that kind of the expansiveness, also included this idea where he would really make the guitars and drums very strong in the recording. So the first album that Slint recorded, which was Tweez, okay, and they credit him, they call him, it was engineered by some fucking durdniffer. That's how he gets his credit on this album. But the bass player for Slint, Ethan Buckler, he didn't like the final mix. He was really displeased with the final mix on this, and he ended up leaving the band. So maybe he just, he didn't like the style of mixing that Albini was doing, because, it didn't maybe showcase his instrument enough or something, whatever. But that was in the documentary Breadcrumb Trail. Albini also is very accomplished as a musician. And he was in two most noteworthy ventures were in the band Big Black, and then later the band Shellac. Big Black is a very hardcore punk, and I just started listening to them. I really didn't know anything about them until I started, looking up information for this video. And I learned that Big Black Atomizer is probably a signature album for him for that period. Very hard driving, but interesting that, again, you can hear, it's punk, and it's, standard punk, but the rhythm, even though the rhythm and there's, like with many punk bands, there's, not a lot of chord changes, but there is this expansiveness with the music and an interest that I found really quite intriguing. So it's going to be, on my shopping list. And another one is Songs About Fucking, which is, again, that very hardcore punk. But there is also this, I don't want to call it campiness, but there is some fun going on with the lyrics. Interesting thing about the album Songs About Fucking is that Steve Albini, during the recording, built an 8-track studio in the basement of his house, and roughly half the songs were recorded on that system in his house. I believe it became known as the basement. More about that, a little bit later. So Albini was born in Pasadena, California, but he was actually raised in Missoula, Montana. That kind of made him interesting to me as well, because I've lived in Bozeman, Montana, and I'm familiar with Missoula. And during that time, when he was a teenager, his biggest musical influence at that time was hearing the Ramones. And that's when he decided that he was going to be, it was punk rock, that was where he wanted to go in terms of playing music. And he as I mentioned, with songs like Big Black, the other Shellac band, with that band, it's a little bit different in that Shellac is more of a math rock band. There's still that hardcore punk, post-punk edge to it, but this is where you're also getting the more complex rhythms and song structures that maybe were not necessarily present during his time recording with Big Black. And shellac has kind of worked out for him. The album I listened to online is At Action Park. Again, really, really good. It's going to be on my shopping list. But it's a kind of project, too, that he and the other band members can work on when they have time and still be involved with all the other items that he's doing and the other bands that he's working with. And I tell you, he's been working with a lot of them. I mean, he was the producer and the sound engineer for the Pixies' debut album, Surfer Rosa. I don't have it. He was also involved in the sound engineering for a few Don Caballero albums. I have 2 Don Caballero albums, but he was not involved with those. Pansy Division, he did a few albums with them. Again, I have a Pansy Division album, but it's not a Steve Albini album. He was involved in the compilation release titled Warsaw, which was a lot of covers of Joy Division songs. He was also has worked with the Stooges, Jesus Lizard, Flogging Molly, Cheap Trick, PJ Harvey. I mean, he's worked with a lot of people. But there are some albums that he worked with that I am familiar with because I do own them. And I've talked about, for example, all right, there's Slint with Tweez. And then there was also Spiderland, all right? So he was involved with these albums. And because of my interest in Slint, in particular, what I learned from watching the documentary with Britt Walford, the drummer, one of the founding members of Slint, is that about the time that Slint was breaking up, he was working with the Breeders. So yeah, Pod. Britt Walford is drumming on this. And Steve Albini was a sound engineer on this. And it's kind of interesting because Britt Walford doesn't get credit on here. The drummer and vocals, he did some vocals, is Shannon Doughton. But it's Britt Walford. That was. Shannon Doughton. That's Britt Walford. Great debut for them. I mean, this is Kim Deal, coming from out of under the shadow of the Pixies. This was really quite an amazing album. And again, with Steve Albini working in the sound engineering, etc. That was, it gives it a really, really nice sound. And then there is another band, and I've talked about them before, Poster Children. Steve Albini was involved in the sound engineering for Daisy Chain Reaction. This is a re-release, 25th anniversary reissue. So, but yeah, engineered by Steve Albini, it says on here. And then inside with this Daisy Chain Reaction, this little booklet, in here that talks about, it's got Steve Albini, engineered by Steve Albini, in the basement, okay? That 8-track studio that he created in his basement, and at the Chicago Recording Company. So this was in 1990. Grunge, post-punk style of music. And he also engineered a couple other Poster Children albums, but I don't have them. But if you've not listened to Poster Children, you should give them a listen. Yeah, Steve Albini sound engineered In Utero, Nirvana's In Utero. And this is a special edition with the main album is on two discs at 45 RPM. But he was the original sound mixer, and he's got the credits in here. So, and some of the original Steve Albini mixes are also in this particular release. He did the mixes for the original album In Utero, but a couple of the songs were remixed afterward by someone else. So they do include the original Steve Albini mixes in there. So yeah, he was working with, Nirvana. So Steve Albini is a very interesting character. He's got some really interesting music. You should check it out. I'm going to be checking him out. I will have in the Down Under a link to the video Breadcrumb Trail. I will also have links in the Down Under to Atomizer, all right, the Big Black album Atomizer, so there'll be a video down there for that. Also for Big Black's songs about fucking will be down in there. And then at Action Park, which is the Shellac, you should check out Shellac. It's also very, very cool material. And then I will also post a link to my previous video that I do talk more in depth about Spiderland and Tweez, with Slint. I'll have links to that also. So I hope you enjoyed that. A little more learning about music. It's the genealogy of music. What I try to do is find all these connections. What do these bands have in common? Sometimes it's players, and in this case, it's the people on the production, the sound production of their releases, and the connections that they create this way. I mean, Steve Albini was working with Slint, and then he was working with Kim Deal when they were coming out with Pod for the Breeders, and then, so Britt Walford gets connected in there. So all these connections can happen. Very interesting stuff. I hope you enjoyed this. Please please subscribe if you haven't already, and share the video. That would be great. If you have listened to other bands that Steve Albini has worked with, leave some comments down there. Do you like Big Black? Are you a fan of Big Black? Are you a fan of Shellac? Let me know, because I'm finding out more about these artists and would like to explore their music a lot more. So please leave a comment. And like I say, enjoy your music while you have it. It's a crazy world out there. You got to relax and unwind sometimes. and music certainly can help you do that. Thanks for stopping by. I hope to see you soon.